Well, it's noon. We could start our announcements and welcomes. And I think we should do so. It's great to see your faces in the tiles, everybody. And Mary Ann Gawain. So this is my first time presiding over a general membership meeting in a lunch and learn. And I'm happy to be here and happy to be here with all of you. If there are any visitors, we welcome you to this, and we will love to see you at meetings throughout the fall and the year. And we hope you will consider joining us as a member. The fees are modest, the rewards are great. We work on voter information and service and registration in Monterey County, and we work on public policies of import to our community. We have 2 upcoming panels planned in October and November. We will be having a presentation in October on redistricting. As I say, it's a panel. I think there will be 3 panelists, and we are looking for questions for that, and also for a criminal justice, local criminal justice equity questions panel that we'll be having in November. Sharon Miller has been the one organizing both of those events, and I think we should hear from Sharon a little bit about submitting questions. You have a preview for us, Sharon?
Thank you, Mary Ann. Yes, I'd be happy to give you a little bit of information. October 13th, it's a redistricting panel talking about why redistricting is so important and what we can do as members of this community to influence how the lines are drawn and what's going to happen the next 10 years until the next census. We have Dr. Jean Gobelet, who is an expert demographer who has worked with the census and the redistricting for Monterey County in the year 2000 and 2010. So she really knows this area. She's been contracted with to do most of the demography work for all the entities that are redistricting in Monterey County, including the county itself. So we have Dr. Gobelet, we have Rosemary Soto, who is leading redistricting for the County Board of Supervisors, something that impacts us all, and Timothy Ryan, who is the Deputy Superintendent at Monterey County Office of Education. So it's going to be a powerful panel. We want to have some good questions for them. You can send questions to me. My email address is on the voter. So you should be able to get that either on the website or when you have your hard copy of the voter. In November, we have another really hot topic, and this will be a panel on changing values for community safety, criminal justice reform. We've gotten Chief Kathy Matalone from Pacific Grove Police Department, Chief Tina Nieto from Marina, and the first woman district attorney for Monterey County, Janine Paccioni, are going to be on that panel. We need some good questions for them. So again, if you would email those questions to me at hbmclean@juno.com, that address is on the voter. It is on the website, I believe, and we will get those questions and get some answers. Looking forward to it. Looking forward to the panels. Looking forward to your questions. Thank you for giving me a little bit of time. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Sharon. Those are going to be great. Any other announcements?
Yes, I'll just mention that the league is going to be staffing 2 polling places this coming Tuesday. It's our way of participating in the election, making sure our little part of the elections all run right. All told, we have about 28 volunteers. We're going to be at the community center at Soper Field. It's the new part of Seaside on the old Fort Ord. So if you'd like to come by and see our little operation, everybody is invited. But if you're going to do any campaigning, you'll have to stand 100 feet away from the entrance.
Thank you.
Tomorrow is the Natural Resources Committee meeting at noon. If you need an invitation, email me. It's always very informative and filled with all the latest news. So I urge you to join us.
And I think it was through that committee that you brought us the idea for the presentation today. So people who are interested in this today, I think would be very interested in the activities of that committee. Well, with that, it's about 12:10. Beverly, are you comfortable that people are here and have had a time to assemble? And would you be ready to introduce our speakers?
I'd be delighted to introduce our speakers.
And then will you also assist us with the transition, because we'll hear a presentation from them. And then, of course, we'll all have an opportunity to Q&A. So I'm looking to you to lead the way on that.
All right, I will take this part of the meeting. I'm not just happy to introduce them, I'm very grateful and delighted that they could make time to be here with us. We have two guest speakers today. The first one, maybe not in order they will be presenting, is Héktor Calderón, Monterey Bay Area community organizer for Californians for Pesticide Reform. Héktor was born in Mexico City and grew up in Santa Ana in Southern California. He received a BA from San Diego State in international business with an emphasis in management in the region of Latin America, and completed an apprenticeship with the UC Santa Cruz Center for Agroecology and Sustainable Food Systems, where he earned an advanced certificate in ecological horticulture. Héktor has worked on diversified vegetable production operations in both Northern and Southern California, and has also worked with orchard trees, both residentially and on small-scale farms. Héktor is the son of immigrants, a protector of racial food justice, food sustainability, and food sovereignty issues. He coordinates the Safe Ag, Safe Schools coalitions in Watsonville, Salinas, and Greenfield. Our other guest speaker is Mark Weller. He is the organizing strategist at Californians for Pesticide Reform. Mark joined the CPR staff in 2014 as community organizer for the Monterey Bay area and was co-director from 2016 to 2019. He returned to Californians for Pesticide Reform in 2020 as a strategist for its organizing campaigns. He previously worked for 14 years as projects director at Monterey Bay-based Unite Here Local 483, organizing community and political support for hospitality workers. Mark has a BA in political science from the University of California, San Diego, an MA in sociology from San Jose State University, and is co-author of Dollars and Votes: How Business Campaign Contributions Subvert Democracy. Certainly a topic that the League of Women Voters agrees with. Thank you very much for being here, and I'm not sure who's going to go first.
I think Héktor and I planned for me to start, to say the best for last. Is that right, Héktor? There we go. Okay, so yes, Californians for Pesticide Reform's been around for 25 years now, and but the pesticide reform movement much longer, going back more than half a century, and a lot of that has been in Monterey County, a lot of that effort. Today, Héktor and I are going to talk to you about pesticides specifically in Monterey County, and the title of our presentation is What You Don't Know Can Hurt You. And of course, our project now is to get it so people can know, both about pesticides, but also about applications in advance. So basic pesticides 101. Pesticides are chemicals that are made to kill. That's what CIDE means, the suffix to kill, or damage pests, usually bugs or weeds. And they are applied in enormous amounts in agricultural regions, especially, and especially in California, in the Central Valley, San Joaquin Valley, and Central Coast agricultural fields. What we are learning more and more about pesticides is that they are often highly hazardous and toxic, even in the tiniest amounts, usually much smaller amounts than the state is willing to admit. And not only are they harmful to pests, but they are harmful to much wildlife, including humans. And another thing that people should understand about pesticides is they drift. Okay? Pesticides drift for miles. There was a record-setting amount of one kind of fumigant applied in Shafter and Kern County in 2020. And that record harmful amount was registered 7.5 miles away from where it was applied. So miles is not an exaggeration. And they persist for weeks after the application in the environment, and sometimes for months in things like carpets and draperies and things like that. Another important fact about pesticides is 4 giant, historically huge corporations control over 3/4 of the international market. Many of them have merged recently. Dow and DuPont, for instance, they used to be separate giant mega corporations. They've recently merged into a company called Corteva. So that is how many of you will see pesticides applied, either in a kind of tractor. They're also applied aerially through airplanes or helicopters, and sometimes in smaller amounts with people using backpack sprayers, things like that. So you'll see them applied in different ways. Now, historically, many of the pesticides that we use today were actually formulated and invented and used first, not in the agricultural fields, but in the battlefields. Pesticide use increased after World War I and World War II because many of the biological weapons that were invented for those causes are now aimed at farm pests. There's a poster from that period here that spells chlorpicrin wrong, but chlorpicrin is actually the #1 pesticide used in Monterey County agricultural fields. It was called a vomiting gas because its particles were so small could get inside the gas masks of soldiers and induce them to vomit. So the soldiers would have to take the gas mask off, and then they'd be exposed to even worse chemicals that could maim or kill them. In 1925, between the wars, there were 1,700 pesticide products in California. At the end of World War II, that had grown to 7,000. There are tens of thousands now. And during that period, some of you might remember, solving things through science and technology and chemicals was seen as, the way forward in the future. It was a good step. Pests were menaces to be warred upon, and we got better living through chemistry. That was a DuPont saying, and this is an actual advertisement. DDT is good for me. And of course, in 1962, the nation started to learn that, well, DDT is not that good for us when Rachel Carson published Silent Spring. And she faced fierce attacks, not just from, well, the males in the scientific community, but from the pesticide companies who came roaring back with attacks. And her theory, of course, was, look, these pesticides we're applying, they don't just harm the pests that they're targeting. That harm goes up through the food chain to the point where if we keep this up, the sounds of spring will be gone. We'll have a silent spring, no more birds, bees, etc. And lucky for us that it wasn't just Rachel Carson making that announcement. And of course, indigenous people had been telling us about don't use this stuff for ages before that. But the United Farm Workers were a key part of the initial battle and pushback against pesticides. In fact, Cesar Chavez's last fast with the United Farm Workers in 1988 was a 36-day fast to bring attention to pesticides that are harming farm workers in the fields. And Chavez would say that in the old days, miners would carry birds with them to warn against poison gas. Hopefully the birds would die before the miners. Now, also remember, Chavez was a vegetarian, way ahead of his time on that. So he was an animal rights guy too. But farm workers are society's canaries. Farm workers and their children demonstrate the effects of pesticide poisoning before anyone else. And that, unfortunately, that story, that cruel pattern of, farm workers telling us, demonstrating with their bodies, with their babies, that this stuff is harming us, hasn't brought the reaction that we've needed. And then scientists, usually years later, will come up with, will do some studies and say, oh my gosh, the farm workers were right. This stuff really is damaging. And then the worst part of that cruel pattern is it won't take years, but it can often take decades for the government to then regulate those pesticides that the scientists have been pointing to, and the farm workers long before them were pointing to as a problem. This, I hope some of you recognize, maybe you've driven past the fields, but people in Monterey County have been able to recognize this sign longer than anywhere else in the world, because this was the prototype, the originally legally required field posting, the original or legally required field posting sign in California that the Monterey Pesticide Coalition pushed for over years of struggle in the late 70s to get the Monterey County Ag Commissioner to post, to require in 1981. 2 years later, that became the model for statewide regulation to post signs in the fields, at least warning the farm workers that there might be something going on and that they should be a little concerned. Now, there are all kinds of problems with this particular sign, but it was a huge step forward in what we're going to be talking about today, which is notifying the community about pesticide applications. Now, this was a time when people in other locations of California were also acting locally to push back against their concerns for pesticide harms. And in Mendocino County, there was a case called the People versus County of Mendocino, and where busloads of school children had been drifted on by an aerial application that was made 3 miles away from the buses. And you had kids, school kids, vomiting, getting sick, headaches, having to leave the bus. It was an awful scene. That was in 1977. And so the community organized, and by 1979, they got their board of supervisors to pass an ordinance prohibiting helicopter and airplane applications of herbicides. Okay, so it took a couple of years, but they got that. And the pesticide company is looking at Monterey County's sign posting thing, looking at what's going on in Mendocino County. They decided to challenge this stuff in the courts. And they originally lost this case in 1984 because the judge, of course, said, what? The people want to be protected from this stuff? They go to their elected leaders and the elected leaders make an ordinance. That's democracy, right? And the pesticide companies were not satisfied with that response. So they made a beeline to Sacramento. And in Sacramento, in 1984, we had what I would describe as the complete corporate capture of California pesticide law. They instituted what's called state preemption at the time. And this is what we've been dealing with ever since. And I have to post this because most people do not believe it. But in our own state code, it says that no ordinance or regulation of local government, including but not limited to an action by a board of supervisors or a city council or a local regulation adopted by the use of an initiative measure may prohibit or in any way attempt to regulate any matter relating to the registration, sale, transportation, or use of pesticides. And any of these ordinances, laws, or regulations are void and of no force or effect. So dealing with pesticides is different from dealing with many other health concerns that we face, because our city councils and our board of supervisors and our school boards are extremely limited in what they can do. They can only regulate for the property that they own, right, that public property. They can't regulate beyond it. So the field right next to school, the home, the public park is not something that we can deal with on a local level. So what that has done is it basically puts legal authority for pesticide regulation in 3 places: the state legislature, and unfortunately, most legislation dealing with pesticides dies in ag committees in Sacramento. The Department of Pesticide Regulation, founded in 1991, they're the main body that creates pesticide policies in the state of California that applies to the entire state. They're a division of Cal EPA. And then county agricultural commissioners. Every county has an ag commissioner, and that person can, in some certain circumstances, make local pesticide regulations. So, and again, I'm noticing time. Quickly, there, and this is, most scientists would tell me this is not a good way to categorize pesticides, but I want to do it in a kind of a simple way. We have pesticides called organophosphates. Most of them affect the nervous system and can cause lung damage, and much more, unfortunately. The most famous one is probably chlorpyrifos, which we, as in the pesticide movement, got canceled in California a couple years ago, and now it's going to be canceled, banned in the entire United States. A huge victory. And then some of you may have heard of malathion before too, going back to the the apple bug days, right? There are also pesticides called fumigants, which are like liquids that become gas very quickly, that are kind of poured into the soil to basically kill everything. And they, almost all of them, have been identified as carcinogens and toxic air contaminants that can cause lung damage. Chloropicrin, we mentioned earlier, is the most used fumigant in Monterey County, closely behind by 1,3-D, or known by its product name Telone. There are neonicotinoids. Those are the category of pesticides that appear to be most harmful to bees and butterflies. A big issue for people in Monterey County, of course, with the disappearance of the monarchs. And there are also many other kinds: carbamates, organochlorines, pyrethroids, others. And you may have heard of the more famous pesticides like glyphosate, which is the main ingredient in Roundup, and paraquat, which has a label on it that says 1 sip can kill. So as far as what you don't know can harm you, there have now been numerous studies, still not enough, by some of our major universities: Columbia University, UC Davis, UC Berkeley, UCLA. You may have heard of the Chamaco study, which is done by UC Berkeley, but has for the last 20 years been studying women and their children, longitudinal study in the Salinas Valley. And what they've been pointing to, what they've been focused on, is prenatal exposure, the assumption being that those would be the most vulnerable people. And so we don't know a lot about what happens after you're born, but we do know a lot about what happens before you're born. And we know that from these studies, small amounts of exposure to the mother of pesticides can cause nerve damage, ADHD, IQ loss, autism, lung damage, and cancers. Okay, and there's a growing body of concern in the scientific community over smaller amounts and even pesticides applied further and further away. Okay. In Monterey County, this brand of pesticide I'm calling organophosphates, we saw that the UC Berkeley Chamaco study in the Salinas Valley found that for every 522 pounds of these organophosphates that are combined, applied within 1 kilometer, which is basically 2/3 of a mile, of a pregnant woman, that tended to reduce the child's IQ scores by more than 2 points. Okay. And we found 15 Monterey County schools that had between 606 and 957 pounds applied. This was in 2016, within 1 kilometer, which would translate, according to the study, to IQ losses averaging between 1.9 and 3 points. Now, again, this is if the mother lived on the school grounds, which isn't exactly what happened, but we wanted to get some idea about where and how damaging this stuff can be. And this is one of the protests that we had in Greenfield at the time, including some speeches by a elementary school kid at the time. It was brilliant. Yaneli Martinez she's the city council member in Greenfield. Her son gave that speech. So here is a table of information about organophosphates applied where they're most applied near schools in Monterey County. This was done by graduate students in the UC Berkeley School of Public Health in 2018. And so their most recent data was 2016 at the time. And you can see that there are enormous amounts of these things applied within 2/3 of a mile of our schools. And not to mention our residences and other areas, public parks. And that we could see that the study would predict that if a pregnant woman had lived at one of these schools, their child would most likely have reduced IQ scores of the amount you see in the right column. So between 2 and 3 points. People, and that's generally what people were saying about the Flint water crisis, that children who were drinking that water would most likely lose between 2 and 3 IQ points. Okay. Another kind of pesticide, if we categorize it by harm, are the carcinogens. And in Monterey County, unfortunately, we've seen over the generations an increase, not a decrease, in the amount of carcinogens that are applied in the ag fields. The good news is in 2018, we had the lowest amount of carcinogens applied in Monterey County since 2001. But the bad news is that amount was basically the high point of what it used to be in the 1990s. So kids born today are more likely over the course of their lifetimes to be exposed to more carcinogens in the air and in the water than the previous generation born in the 1990s. So looking at another study recently done by UCLA, the Fielding School of Public Health, they looked at pesticides in childhood brain cancers. And this is, I know, too much information for the time we have, but I just want people to be aware that these pesticides are applied in Monterey County, okay, and that 7 of the 8 that UCLA found were linked to childhood brain cancers are banned in many other countries. You can see this kind of 1, 2, 3. The 4th column is the number of countries that these pesticides are banned in. They're not banned here, okay? And that the amount of pesticides applied, the acres applied are in those last 2 columns, one for a period 1998 to 2011, and then from 2012 to 2018. Overall, the other thing I want people to know is this study, sorry, I'm supposed to stop now. This study was, the study was done of applications within 2.5 miles, of the pregnant mother. Okay, so again, pardon me for racing, but they also did a study of childhood leukemias, similar situations. Many of those pesticides are banned in other countries. These are applied in Monterey County, sometimes in huge and growing amounts. You can see overall that the pesticides linked to childhood leukemias are actually increasing in Monterey County, not decreasing over time, and that certain ones are very concerning, like paraquat, which is banned in 48 countries, but 45,000 pounds were applied on average every year in this county. So the other issue I want to quickly bring out before I turn over to Héktor is, where is this stuff applied? Most of those schools you saw earlier with the organophosphates are in the Salinas Valley. Of course, we would expect that to be in the Salinas Valley. But the other thing about the Salinas Valley is it's largely a Latinx population. So there is certainly a concern about environmental racism to a policy that allows these pesticides. Again, many of these are, almost all of them are banned in the European Union, for instance, that most of these pesticides that we allow to be applied are going to affect Latinx families far more than any other. And so then the next question is, okay, so then how do we find out? And, how do we prepare so that we can take precautions to stop us from being affected by these? Well, the fact is right now you can't. There is no way to find out beforehand when these pesticides are going to be applied, and that needs to be fixed. So I will turn it over to Héktor now. And again, sorry, Héktor, for going a little bit over.
Perfect. Thank you, Mark. Yeah, so I'll sort of kind of lead into, how Safe Ag, Safe Schools sort of comes in here in our region for both Monterey and Santa Cruz County. And so I will there will be a little bit of an overlap with some of the information that Mark might have already mentioned, but just so that you all know, I might kind of skim through those relatively quickly. So essentially, Safe Ag, Safe Schools is one of the community coalitions here in Santa Cruz and Monterey, and we protect our community members from pesticides. Here, let me make sure, there we go. And so, as a part of SAS, also known as Safe Ag, Safe Schools, just a little bit of background of who we are, is that it's 50 organizations and plus, and they're made out of, individuals from the community working really together to, reduce the threat of pesticide exposures in the Monterey Bay area, focused on increasing our grassroots pressure on policymakers to reduce the hazardous pesticide use in and around schools and residential communities. And so that's a little bit about Safe Ag, Safe Schools, also known as SAS, which I'll be referring to from now on. A quote that I just wanted to share with all of you was that, Dr. Antonio Velasquez, who's now retired, used to be a doctor in the Monterey County, had written this beautiful op-ed in the Monterey County. I think it was in the Sentinel. And he was quoted saying, "My hopes is that the Monterey Bay will once again take leadership of toxic pesticide warnings with the 21st century version of the 1981 Monterey County Pesticide Field Posting Ordinance. This time adding posts on a digital web in addition to the posts in the ground that you normally see just in that picture right there, which are the field postings." And so he was a big proponent, along with many other organizers and folks who worked on this, to get these field postings on the fields so that people wouldn't go into the fields when they were being applied or had been applied. So this was something that I just wanted to share with all of you. The next thing was, as you all already know, the, Salinas Valley is the, salad bowl of the world. And we do produce, 9 million pounds. Well, because we produce tons of food and it's exceedingly unique to the region, we also use 9 million pounds of pesticides that are applied every year in Monterey County. And so, because we do have a demand for products that are consumed around the world, those being leafy greens, berries, and many other types of vegetables, Salinas is a huge producer of products here in this valley. So pesticides, as Mark had already mentioned, pesticides are chemicals that are made to kill or damage, pests, bugs, or weeds. Pesticides are applied in huge amounts, especially known in the Central Valley and the Central Coast ag fields. Pesticides are often highly hazardous and toxic and harmful, not only to humans, but to animals in our environment. And we know that pesticides can drift for miles, and after weeks of applications have been done. And we know that 4 mega pesticide companies control over about 75% of the international market. The next one. So what does a pesticide look like? And I know that Mark had already sort of mentioned this, so I'll skim through it really quickly. But the 10 top pesticides applied near our schools, just in the Monterey County, 5 of them were toxic air contaminants, 4 were neurotoxins, 3 were carcinogens, and 2 are reproductive and developmental toxins. So we know that those are being, applied near our schools, not only within schools, but within our communities. And we know that, these particular words might be, new to some of you, but you might already know some of these, but we know that toxic, air contaminants are, air pollutants. We know that neurotoxins are destructive to our nervous tissues. And, carcinogens are, can be known to have causes of cancer in children and adults. And reproductive toxins are just chemicals that are biohazards or, physical agents that can impair the reproductive capabilities in not only women, but also in men, and can cause developmental toxins to interfere with proper growth, right? So these are just some of the things that we're dealing here in the Monterey, but also in the Santa Cruz County, right? These were just some of the things that Mark had already mentioned of how some of these are applied. I showed some images that were produced through our drift guides that we provide to community members and farm workers. So this is just sort of a visual. Some of the symptoms that you might, one might feel if they're being exposed. And there are 2 types of exposures, right? We know that there's, there's acute pesticides, right? Which is one-time exposures. And those can be from, diarrhea, vomiting, sweating, muscle tremors, and confusion. Then we also know that there are chronic ones that are long-term and repeated exposures to low levels of pesticides, which we know is the bigger issue that we're dealing with community members, and with something that Mark had mentioned with environmental racism, right? But I do want to mention that we know that there was a report from the California Environmental Health Tracking Program, which was in collaboration with the California Department of Health, found that 8 out of 10 pesticides that are heavily used in the area stay in the environment for a week or more. And Monterey County has the highest percentage of students who attend schools within a quarter of a mile of these heavily sprayed areas. And as Mark had already mentioned, Latinx students are about 3 times more likely to attend these schools in these areas. So that is, the environmental racism that is happening in our county. Let me go to the next slide. Some other victories that we've had that I just wanted to sort of mention were, our statewide buffer zone policy, which is, first ever. And this was essentially just saying that there needed to be a quarter mile buffer zone between the schools, and that they couldn't be spraying between 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday. And essentially, they had to have like a 36-hour period between fumigations and school hours as soon as Monday came around. So essentially they would be spraying or applying over the weekends, mainly on Saturdays, right? So this was sort of a huge victory on our behalf. It's not perfect. We would have wanted more, and there were, there was some sort of concession that had to be made, which ended up to being 1/4 of a mile from schools. And so the other one was just really quickly was the farming safely near schools. And this is just sort of a pilot project that is first of its kind in the nation. It's not perfect. And we know that these are 10 schools are currently receiving these sort of notifications that are opt-in by people who want this information. And essentially they receive it through email or text notifications. And these are normally parents or teachers or community members that are receiving these that are near that school that might want to be known. But FYI, it's mainly only for fumigations, no other pesticides that are being provided in terms of these giving notifications to the community. Next is, so why do we want to be notified, and how these notifications that Mark had mentioned that we don't currently receive could be useful. And so knowing about pesticide applications in advance will enable, precautions. And that could be in these exact examples, right? Where farm workers could use this for unions to check before entering fields. Parents, teachers could keep children with asthma indoors if toxic air contaminants are scheduled to be applied. Women and girls of childbearing age could avoid organophosphate applications that can endanger their pregnancies. The public could warn the ag commissioner and growers of nearby events that may not know about that could endanger their lives. Doctors and nurses could more easily find out if a pesticide drift might be a cause in their patients' symptoms when they're coming in, not knowing exactly why they're feeling sick. So these are ways in which these notifications can be useful. And I'll kind of discuss a little bit more in detail about what we're looking in terms of notification. So the next step would be, why do we see this as an invincible problem? Well, one of the main reasons is that concentrated pesticide reform movement is needed. And so that it takes a special and sustained effort to address an invisible problem that, people can't seem to see and don't see the long-term effects of how that might be affecting them in the long run. And so the second one is, people don't usually see this, pesticide as an issue because there are particles that are so small that, lots of times you can't see them. They're just in the air, and people don't know or aren't looking for, drifting pesticides. Pesticide companies and governments keep this pesticide information secret. And so, essentially we want to make sure that, people know about this, that this is an actual issue, and that we know that, pesticide testings can, there at times can be lies about what that might be entailed. And so they don't release the application information to the public. Next one is the right to know, which has been our campaign for the last 2 years. And so essentially we're wanting to get being able to notify the public about these dangers around, applications that are occurring, which are normally hazardous. And so essentially we're demanding the right to know about threatening circumstances already happening and potentially could be dangerous to our communities. And we know that extreme weather conditions, like they already kind of give these sort of notifications for extreme weather conditions like hurricanes, severe storms, floodings, smog, air quality, fires, power outages, previous sex offenders, including where they may live. So why aren't we allowed to get notifications about pesticides, given that we live in a highly rural community that is rich in agriculture? And so, I think this was already a slide that was already given, but essentially these would be giving these applications would be able to give precautions to these sort of communities, which I've already mentioned in the prior slide. And so I won't talk too much about this, but these are just pesticide notifications in recent campaigns. And we know that, the DPR is the Department of Pesticide Regulation, had also tried to do these like residential fumigation notification policy hearings that were being held in April of 2016. And we know that we're in the sort of stages with the state as well, after so much work in the past 2 years, that in this, we're using this sort of example of this particular recent campaign where they've held these meetings with community members and then eventually not do anything. They just sort of stepped away from being able to implement anything that they've been promising the community members. And so just using this as an example of previous things that have been done around fumigation notifications, and then nothing ever actually coming of that. And so this was sort of an example that I wanted to give you. So the whole campaign for the last 2 years has been around these notices of intent, which we call them NOIs. And so farmers technically have to apply for these restricted materials, which are submitted as notices of intent at least 24 hours prior to applications, and allow for a 5-day window to begin the application. So the county ag commissioner can then approve or deny these notices of intent. And currently the general public has no access to any real-time ag pesticide information, except for those 10 schools in Monterey County that I had already mentioned through the Farming Safely in Your School pilot project. Only way anyone in California can find out about this most hazardous ag pesticide applications right now is after the fact, right? Through these public request acts that you have to submit to the ag commissioner. And essentially, we know that those information is already public information, right? But you're having to request it only after the applications have already happened. And so our thing is we want to know before, not after. And so these are sort of an example of what these notices of intent look like, right? That they're sort of kind of withholding from us, even though they're public information. And it's very small. It's just an example, one that was used and that it was disseminated through that pilot project that I'd been mentioning. And so these are essentially these notices of intent that these companies have to submit to the ag commissioner, right? And with them, they come with these maps, right? And so these maps essentially tell you where they'll be applying. We don't know exactly where they apply, but they give at least an estimated of where these can be applied, right? And so just to give you some examples of things that we've been doing in the last 8 months has been that Watsonville City Council passed its first of its kind resolution in October 27th. Of 2020, and that was just asking our county ag commissioners to publicly post information specifically on toxic pesticide applications, which is essentially asking them to just post those notices of intent, those raw documents on his already existing website, right? And essentially, this was sort of our first move in garnering support through city council members and cities in general to begin to get support. Although they're just symbolic resolutions, they're at least a way to move and put pressure on our ag commissioner in our county, both in Santa Cruz as well as in Monterey, right? Our second one, just really quickly, was in Greenfield, and this was very similar. This was in the South County of Monterey. And this was the first it's in Monterey County, right? It's not the first in the Monterey Bay region, but it was just in Monterey County. And so this was in March 9th of 2021, essentially doing the same thing, urging our Monterey County Agricultural Commissioner to post in advance the online notices of future pesticide applications. And this was an unanimous, 4-0 vote from council members passing this resolution. And just sort of a tip or a tidbit is that we had council member Yaneli Martinez, who's also a SAS member of our strong South County Greenfield branch that we hold. And several Greenfield residents argued, just saying that by providing this information, it would better protect their children from any particular hazardous pesticides drifting, knowing that Greenfield is surrounded 360 by complete conventional agriculture. And so there were multiple comments and concerns that were expressed at these meetings, which is why we had a victory in this particular resolution. Our third one was the first school resolution was at the Pajaro Valley Unified School District. And this was brought on by our SAS member that's a teacher in the actual county of Santa Cruz. And this was brought on on March 24th of 2021, and this was voted on. And it had about 24 community members, submit public comments to be read off in the virtual meeting. We know that some of the language was from the resolution was sort of tweaked, and eventually we had two great trustees, trustee Maria Orozco and trustee Kim DeSerpa, who essentially said, why aren't we not including our ag commissioner? Because essentially the resolution was turned or sort of manipulated, saying, well, the state is taking care of this. But what we wanted to make sure is that the ag commissioner was held responsible and that they weren't passing the buck to the state. And so they eventually voted, all of the trustees except trustee Georgia Costa had abstained from actually voting. And so it passed. But of course, the older version of the resolution was submitted, and that was what was voted on. And we got our first school resolution in the Pajaro Unified School District. Our second one was the Greenfield Unified School District, and that was our second resolution that passed with flying colors, given that we had great support by two SAS leaders who are trustees, those being David Kong and Sonia Heredia, who were able to vouch and push it on with the agenda with no changes to the resolution, and was like I said, it passed with flying colors. It was all 5 trustees didn't hesitate and really believed that this was a good symbolic gesture or sort of movement forward in garnering the support that we were asking for. And our last spot that we had gone to was at the city of Soledad, which is in the southern part of Monterey. And while this was one of the really hardest ones that we had to deal with, we were able to get this particular resolution passed, and that we had to go twice, one on May 5th of 2021 to get it considered on the agenda. And then on May 19th, we eventually got the resolution passed with no language changed, and essentially had a 3 out of 5 council. We had a 3-2 vote, essentially having 3 of the council members vote in favor and 2 of them voting against the actual resolution. And so this was a huge success, and eventually we had garnered 5 resolutions demanding our ag commissioner to post these notices of intent on his already existing website. And so this has been the work that has been leading from January, more like October of last year to October now, right? That we're coming up close to. And so essentially, our goals for of the notification campaign is to make pesticides more visible to the public, right? By creating new protections and the public's improved ability to take precautions and challenge current applications, and open space in which to create future protections and build people power, right? And so we did in May, late May, which is the 27th of May, we ended up having a press conference in the Monterey County Ag Commissioner's office, where multiple, it was a statewide sort of press conference and delegation where, multiple folks in Bakersfield, Tulare, Modesto, and as well as online, were all demanding or holding press conferences in front of their ag commissioner's office, along with holding a delegation to demand our commissioners to web post these pesticide warnings. And so here's a simple picture that you can see, and this happened in May 27th. We're seeing that it's working, and after years of refusal from our ag commissioner Henry Gonzalez in Monterey County, we've met with him several dozen times with SAS members and the DPR director, and the DPR director has promised that the statewide notification system they're sort of working on, but we know that might take many years. And so essentially we know that between the Watsonville, Greenfield, and Soledad City Councils, as well as the Greenfield Unified School District, Pajaro Valley Unified School, have passed these resolution urging the Ag Commissioner to web post pesticide warnings in advance. These are sort of ways of building our people power, but also our power in demanding our Ag Commissioner and also putting some pressure on him as well. Let's see. So what are some steps that people can take? We know that awareness of this particular issue, like today's presentation from Mark and I's, and letting informing friends, colleagues, family, and peers about the situation at hand in our communities. We also have petitions that we would love to have folks share and sign, given that it is a statewide petition with that we're trying to collect through all of our organizers throughout the state, and actions, right? So we're asking you all, along with any people that you might know, on how to participate on some of the actions that we might be doing locally around pesticide reform in the Monterey and Santa Cruz County, right? Just like I said, calls to actions, it's just simple things, telling your Ag Commissioner that you have the right to know about pesticides in our food and how it's affecting our communities. We also have SAS meetings, both in Salinas and in Watsonville. And we'd love for all of you to be a part of that so that you can hear more up-to-date stuff as it's coming along. And we'd love to have you all a part of that, participating and being able to hear more about the work that we've been doing currently. And so, individual sign-ons by you all, you can get to the petition either at safeagsafeschools.org or through the pesticidereform.org, and you'll see that there'll be links to getting onto the petition and signing it. And we'd love for all of you to be able to, sign it and share it. Also, just any sort of letters of support from your organization would be great. We've managed to collect from both of the counties. In Santa Cruz, we've collected about 22 different support letters from organizations, which we normally will share with elected officials, as well as with whoever we end up meeting. That could be with the state or with the city or the county, and we normally share those. So if that's something that the Women's League voters would love to be able to be a part of, we would love for you guys' support. And then, of course, where you can find us, we're very active on both of these social medias, Facebook and Instagram. And then, of course, our website. And that's pretty much it about what we've been doing. And I want to leave enough room for us to have questions so that we can answer them.
Thank you very much, Héktor and Mark. We appreciate your presentation. I would like to open to questions. Let's start with the ones in the chat, and then we'll move on to raising our hands and taking questions, verbal questions.
The first question is, are there any air purification systems that can filter out these pesticides?
Short answer is no. The longer answer is, we don't want people to have to wear gas masks. And we know historically that even gas masks don't work on some of these pesticides like fluoropicarin. It was designed to get inside the gas masks. And then secondly, not exactly filtration systems, but the ag industry is attempting to develop tarps that they call impermeable, but every time they say they've gotten the latest impermeable tarp, we still get record amounts of the particular pesticide, usually fumigants, that are recorded in our 6 statewide pesticide monitoring stations. So these fancy tarps are not working. So again, back to the short answer, which is no.
Yeah, I don't think there is anything in particular to add. I think that what Mark had already mentioned is, right on point. And I think that, folks shouldn't have to have systems. We should just be able to demand that, ag not use hazardous pesticides that are harming to not only humans, but animals, to our environment, to our soil. So, yeah.
Oh, thank you. This question speaks to the demographic of our organization. What are the effects of pesticides on seniors? And this person is specifically thinking about the senior housing that's behind Nob Hill in Salinas.
Unfortunately, testing, research, that kind of science we haven't had enough of it. And it has focused, as I said earlier, on younger populations. And the material that I'm familiar with that does address elderly populations is almost always about farm families. So I don't know. We could actually look up and see what pesticides are applied near the Nob Hill in Salinas. I mean, that's certainly something we can do, but I don't know. I don't know that anybody knows the answers to how much more vulnerable elderly populations are to, say, middle-aged or younger.
Next question is, why are European countries able to ban these types of pesticides that we are still using?
In the United States, moneyed interests have a lot more power over politics and policy than almost any other place in the, almost any other place that we're agricultural competitors with, right? And so this plays out in the system of regulation, but also the system of pesticide registration. So in Europe, they have to go through a much more thorough process, which doesn't mostly rely on the pesticide company's own research. If you look at the stuff that goes to the US EPA, that US EPA considers, it's almost entirely research that the pesticide companies did themselves before they attempted to put the pesticide on the market. And there's very little work by the federal government scientists on this, if at all. And so that's not the case in European countries. They have, the governments will then take over and say, okay, you've given us your tests, so we're going to do our own, right? We don't do that much here. And secondly, the standard of health concern is literally 10 times more strict in the European Union than it is in the United States. So here we got a 1 in a million extra deaths from something, and there it's 1 in 100,000. I'm the other way around. So they will tolerate only 1 in a million extra deaths from some pollutant or something. We will tolerate 1 out of every 100,000. So it's a 10 times higher standard, making things like the fumigants that we use ubiquitously in California unlikely to pass the test in Europe.
Can you comment on what reaction you get from public officials, especially those who represent the areas you're talking about? Thinking about Chris Lopez or John Phillips for the Board of Supervisors, Robert Rivas and Ana Caballero in the State Assembly and State Senate.
Mark, do you want to do the state and then I'll do county?
Sure. So our state level representatives, during the last 10 years, I think in Monterey County have been better than in most of California. And also remember, we had State Senator Bill Monning for a long time, and he's always been at the forefront of the pesticide reform movement back to when he was a young man working at CRLA in Salinas in the 1970s. So that's been better. And certainly Mark Stone is receptive to us when we meet, and Robert Rivas as well. They haven't had any bills before them yet regarding pesticide regulations, but they have kind of signed on to some of our previous campaigns. And Ana Caballero, less supportive. There's been no doubt about that. I mean, she's scheduled meetings and then canceled them and not rescheduled and things like that with Safe Ag Safe Schools. And that was before you got here, Héctor. So that's why I added that little local comment.
Yeah, and I'd say for county, for example, I know that you brought up Chris Lopez as well as John Phillips. I'll start with John Phillips. I mean, I don't think that John Phillips has been one to be supportive of any of the stuff that we've been working on in terms of getting any particular notification. We know that in the North, he does have some of the schools that are a part of this particular school notification pilot project. And when we had gone, when was it, like a year ago, to the Board of Supervisors, because they were planning to get rid of this actual pilot project because of funding, we know that John Phillips was not for its continuance. And so we know that his work was, it's not functional, it doesn't work, and people are clearly don't really want the information. So we know that John Phillips isn't really for making transparency and accountable to our ag commissioner, given that they do appoint the ag commissioner in our county in Monterey, that being Henry Gonzalez. In terms of Chris Lopez, he is sort of, hard to read. He's one that says that unless he has hard facts and research, which are there, we know that there's been tons of research where Mark has brought up in terms of the Chamaco study, and as well as the expansion of, when we'd gone to the Board of Supervisors last year in September, we were hoping to get this expansion pilot project to do the whole county, but also to get these notifications that we've been asking for to be also implemented, was a sort of a start. And he simply said, there's not enough information, there's not enough desire, and public doesn't necessarily really care to know. So therefore, why should we have to do any of this? So I would say that neither of them were sort of supportive of the work that we've been doing in the last 2 years. Mark, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
Well, unfortunately, neither was Luis Alejo. In fact, he gave a number of erroneous pieces of information about pesticides while he served. Well, he still serves on the board, but while we were having this discussion you were talking about. And, but I do want to say that Jane Parker and Wendy Root Askew have been extremely supportive. And Wendy, Héctor put up earlier our May 27th protest at the Ag Commissioner's office. Supervisor Root Askew attended that and was with us. So that's a one positive sign out of our Board of Supervisors.
Marianne Goyne just wanted to remind the other members of the league that our local league did send a letter in support of the NOIs. So another question is, if I buy certified organic produce, does this contribute to a reduction in the use of pesticides or not?
I mean, yeah, I would say it does. It does contribute. But I think that sometimes we need to go a little bit further than just buying with our dollars, right? In this case, buying organic. There's other ways to also be able to advocate for these communities that are, aren't being advocated in a lot of the times, right? So like farm workers and community members and school children who happen to be right near fields for whatever reason, because it's cheaper to build schools near fields. So I think that we need to go beyond just buying with our dollars, but more so like doing things of bringing more awareness around this particular issue. And that would be, talking to people about these particular issues and what their thoughts are and how they can contribute to this sort of movement of pesticide reform, right?
It seems to me the only way you're ever really going to get rid of pesticides is if people switch to organic farming. So can you say whether there's been any increase in the amount of organic farming in the Salinas Valley over the past years that this pesticide reform has been working so hard. Mark?
You want to take it, Hector?
No, go for it.
Okay, so the immediate answer that I got from the latest ag report from Commissioner Gonzalez is that indeed organic, there are more organic products produced in Monterey County than ever before, and that in fact, in a year where it was one of those rare years where agriculture didn't do that well in Monterey County, it actually fell off from previous years, which is really rare. Of course, pandemic might explain some of that. Organic sales increased. And I don't have the numbers off the top of my head. My apologies. I could find them for you. But that is a good sign. Now, the proportion of fields in California that are organic are still just 1%. And so we have a long way to go on that. Santa Cruz has a higher percentage. And again, I don't know the exact number on that either. But our region is better than most of California for organic, but we still have a long, long way to go.
I would like to ask you to talk very briefly about strawberries, which is a big crop locally. What kind of toxic chemicals do they use? And what percentage grown here in Monterey and Santa Cruz is organic? And do you have is any of your notification to do with strawberries?
There's a reason to focus on strawberries, given that I believe we grow more than any other region in the state, in Monterey, and well, mostly in Monterey, but also some in Santa Cruz County. And that was, one of the original reasons for kind of this iteration of the local pesticide reform movement was when the pesticide companies were trying to replace a pesticide that was being banned, a methyl bromide, with an even worse pesticide called methyl iodide. And some of you were part of that campaign too. And that was, to address strawberries. And so because of on the ground push, and our boards of supervisors in both Monterey and Santa Cruz County said, we don't want methyl iodide here, the manufacturer actually withdrew it. So there is a long history of concern about strawberries, but also for people who've been on a long time, I mean, they know that the growth in strawberries has replaced many other products that we used to grow in the region. And the pesticides that are applied on strawberries are some of the worst. These fumigants that we mentioned earlier, chloropicrin and 1,3-D or Telone, are fumigants, again, banned in more than 30 countries of the world, that drift the furthest, are highly toxic, recognized even by the US EPA. And those are two of the most prominent pesticides used on strawberries. And the organic strawberries are better, they taste better, everything's about them is better. So that's certainly a fruit we would encourage or organic purchase of, in part to address this awful issue.
I think you said earlier in your presentation that there are notices being given on fumigants, but not other uses, other pesticide uses or types. Are those notices only to those school districts that have kind of complained and not to the other school districts? I have a two-part question. That's one part.
Oh.
Well, and the other part is, does that mean the door has been opened just a crack for making some move by the Ag Commissioner?
So our hope was that this would open at a crack. And originally, Commissioner Gonzalez tried to close it down. This was this program, which is, again, it's only in 10 schools in Monterey County, in North Monterey County School District, and in the southern part of the Powell Valley Unified School District, 3 schools up there, 7 schools in North Monterey County. And it's only for fumigants. So basically those 2 I just mentioned, and sometimes there are a couple more that they get informed about. and it is a 5-day advance notice. So what we liked about that, of course, was, the time, 5 days, and that, schools would finally know when this stuff is being applied. That was before we got the schools policy. And when we got the statewide schools buffer zone policy, that made it so fumigants really can only be applied within a quarter mile of schools on Saturdays. So it made this fumigant notification system, we still want it, but not quite as valuable as it once was. But overall, there are two major problems with that notification system. One is it's not open to everybody. You've got to opt in, right? And then, the communities we're most concerned about, there are many vulnerable people who don't want to give their information to the government, right? To be contacted. So it's opt-in, it's not available to everybody. And then two, it's basically limited to a third of the pesticides that are used, rather than all of them. And we know, I hope you now know, that there are other pesticides besides fumigants that are really, really concerning and damaging, especially organophosphates that Chimakos has been studying in this longitudinal thing since the late 90s. So we still think there's some space there, and SAS helped keep the door open. That is where the Board of Supervisors actually did agree that we shouldn't close that system down. They didn't go the extra step to expand it, which is what we're hoping.
Sylvia, did you have a question?
I feel that with our current approach, it's like there's nowhere to hide. The fumigants, the air, and once we ban one chemical, they can replace with another, which will be found to be toxin. So fundamentally, we need to aim for the ban. Now, have we ever gotten enough data to link those people who are harmed by the fumigation in order to package them to ask for compensation and damage? Once money is on the table, those policymakers may take a different take. So the linkage of damage, is this strong enough? Can we take action, team up with ACLU or somebody to ask for compensation? Anyway, because I feel like really there's nowhere to hide. And I can also understand why the agriculture, everybody was so against notification. It seems to be a lot of rules. They are saying that the government is overregulated, and I can see that point. And we don't see enough, and they see too much.
We also, in the movement, don't like the whack-a-mole approach. Like, we knock one pesticide out and another one's going to replace it. And that has been history, okay? There have been times when we've needed, if we can ban a pesticide, we do. One of them was recently the brain-harming chlorpyrifos, which had been banned for home use because of the science and in parks and residences for, in 2000, 2001, and continued use in the fields for 20 more years before we were able to push the government to cancel it. And that was basically a defense of science. This is during the Trump administration, and they're like they didn't care what the science said. So we had to win that fight, one, to get rid of chlorpyrifos, but also to say, hey, science has got to be part of our policy making in the future. So luckily, that one was a victory. But you're also right in that the fight against Roundup now and chlorpyrifos, and it looks like some other potential pesticides are being fought in the court with huge settlements, leading some of these companies to withdraw the product from the shelves. In fact, Roundup's being taken off the shelves in 2023. Right? They're still going to use it in the fields, but Bayer Monsanto has said they're going to take that away. And it's because of the lawsuits. So I totally agree with that. But then the issue is, do we have enough to get larger suits against like whole branches, say categories of pesticides? And that might be a little harder because a lot of them are made by different manufacturers and things like that. But we also believe that the science is going to be significant enough in the next maybe year or two that kind of approach you're suggesting, I think, Sylvia, is going to be a possibility. So it won't just be one organophosphate. It could be the entire category. Yeah. And
Thank
that would be a helpful way to move forward, I think.
Well, I'll turn it back to Mary Ann then, and thank both of our speakers very much for an enlightening and disturbing presentation.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, disturbing is the term, but I followed this through the years to some extent, and yet I certainly learned a lot today. And I thought you're likening it to the Flint situation was a powerful little bit that helped it stick in my mind, and is a good, effective point to share with audiences. So fantastic presentation. Thank you very much. We wish you all the best in your important work. And perhaps you'll be coming back to tell us, we hope, about some successes in the future, and we'd like to be a part of that. You've heard now, audience, that we have our redistricting program coming up next month. We hope that you will be there. That's something we can all be participating in. The redistricting committee under Sharon Miller's very, very capable and energetic leadership is just doing a tremendous job of monitoring redistricting of the many redistricting entities in our county. So if anyone wants to join that or be part of that, let us know, talk to Sharon. Thank you so much for being here, and join us again next month. With that, any further comments? We will call this meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.